In this video, I'll be talking about 5 interesting historical and cultural sites in Kansas City, Kansas. When I visited Kansas City, Kansas, I gotta admit, I didn't really know all that much about Kansas history. It's kind of a state that I just never really learned about and was never particularly interested in. When it came to its history, I sort of assumed that the history was very similar to other states in the Midwest. But upon kind of visiting some of the historical sites and talking with local historians, I learned that my perceptions were way wrong. There's actually a lot more interesting history in Kansas City, Kansas than I ever knew about. So the first historical site that you can visit in Kansas City, Kansas is Caw Point, where you can learn all about the history of Lewis and Clark. So in 1804, Lewis and Clark actually took off for kind of the western portion of their expedition from Caw Point in Kansas City, Kansas. And so today there stands a statue there overlooking this beautiful 10-acre park with all sorts of historical markers so you can learn about the Lewis and Clark history in Kansas City, Kansas. Lewis and Clark stayed in this area for several days as they collected supplies and prepared their group to leave for their western expedition. And because this was kind of the furthest explored point on their expedition, really from Caw Point on was all new exploration that they were doing in what became the western United States. Historical stop number 2 is the WYANDOT burial grounds in downtown Kansas City, Kansas. During our visit, I got to meet a few members of the WYANDOT Nation and really learn about the complicated and often sad history of the WYANDOT Nation in Kansas City, Kansas. The burial grounds have been around since about 1840, 1845, roughly around that time. And essentially ever since then, the WYANDOT Nation has been fighting to try and protect this burial ground from development, from other people wanting to take over the land, etc., which is really the story of Native American life, sadly, in the United States today. But it was officially recognized as a historical landmark in the last few years, which means hopefully that fight is over and the WYANDOT Nation can continue to protect and treat this land as burial grounds for their ancestors. Stop number 3 on your historical tour of Kansas City, Kansas is QUINDARO. QUINDARO became a destination that slaves ran away to in Kansas because Kansas was a free state during the Civil War. And so they came here as a destination to start a new life escaping slavery. And after the Civil War, QUINDARO started to thrive and became the first place where there was an all-black university, and the only one that ever existed in Kansas, at Western University, which was on the grounds of where the QUINDARO ruins currently exist. Stop number 4 on your historical tour of Kansas City, Kansas is the Underground Railroad Museum. A visit to the Underground Railroad Museum will really kind of show you and tell the stories of people who escaped slavery into Kansas and started a new life, predominantly in the QUINDARO community. And I thought this museum was full of interesting stories that had a lot of artifacts and showed a lot of photos, and you could really follow from the point of the Underground Railroad through the Civil Rights Movement and how much intersectionality has existed in Kansas City since the mid-1850s, and I had no idea that this existed prior to going to this museum. Stop number 5 on your historical tour of Kansas City, Kansas is Grittner Place. Grittner Place is the oldest house still in existence in the county where Kansas City, Kansas is, and it dates back to 1857. This stop was particularly fun because the local historian who helps run the museum dresses up as the Grittner family and really tells the stories of the family that lived in this home. He's a super eccentric and fun guy who really brings the history of this building and this family to life. Thank you so much for joining me and nerding out a little bit on history of Kansas City, Kansas.